Mr. Scare here, and today, I have some gas station horror stories that will give you chills. But before I begin reading, hit the like button, and for regular horror stories, subscribe to Mr. Scare. We are super close to 2,000 subscribers. Now I am not a worker at the gas station, but this happened to me as a customer. I used to have to drive and travel across a few states to see my mom. And on my journey that I took for years, I always drove through a small part of West Virginia. And before I continue, let me just say that parts of West Virginia are scenic and beautiful, and most of the time the people are really nice. But like everywhere else, there is a small portion of creepy and intimidating people in this state too. Now back to my story. So I had to stop a few times either on my way to my mom's place or while coming home from her house. It was mainly to refill the gas in West Virginia. And unlike the typical stories where idiots visit shady places at night, I did not. I always went during the day, because I am well aware that in these parts, it's better to not risk our lives by going at odd hours. Moreover, these gas stations aren't always self-serve and are rarely open late. This one time I made a few detours to sightsee, and it got dark by evening when my gas light was on. I still had about 300 miles to go, so I had to stop somewhere and refill the tank. I ended up stopping at the next gas station, which was in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by woods endlessly. I parked under one of the lights next to a pump and saw that it was not self-service and did not accept cards. I would have to go in. Now normally, this was not a big deal for me. I looked around and observed that there were no other cars. In fact, there were very few lights around in general. One of the lights was in front of the rundown shop and, of course, it was flickering. The windows were dirty and opaque, so I couldn't see in through them, but there was this neon sign on the door that read open. I get somewhat 10 to 15 feet away from my car and stop. I just kind of stared at the shop, thinking to myself about how that didn't feel right. It was weird, and when I unlocked my phone out of habit, my cell didn't even have service here. I just didn't like the feeling. I looked around assessing my surroundings, and it just screamed of a horror movie. I got back in my car and decided I'll try again somewhere else, or take the next exit and look for something civilized. I had made up my mind that I didn't mind if I ran out of gas. I'll sleep in my car until daybreak and walk somewhere with cell service. Anything would be better than going in there. Just as I opened my door, I heard a creaking noise behind me. I turned back to see the door of the store open slowly. A man dressed like the 1980s stepped out of it. What caught my attention was that he wasn't old. He was maybe in his mid-30s, and he asked me if I needed any help. He sounded normal. But what the heck was he doing here? I said I'm good and got in my car. Something was off about this dude, and my inner voice was screaming to leave. I started my engine and noticed that the man was gone. He was nowhere. The moment I saw that he was gone from where he was before, I immediately looked near the car doors. I just did not want him to have crept in closer to me. But luckily he wasn't. I even checked the mirrors, and he was nowhere to be seen. How the hell did he just vanish? And I say vanish because had he entered from the same door that he had come out from, it would have made the same creaking noise. But I had heard none of it. In fact, no footsteps too. I was in no mood to stay there for another second. Immediately, I closed my windows and got ready to leave. I flinched and gasped at a sudden knocking on my passenger seat's window. A completely normal-looking man was gesturing for me to lower my window. And by completely normal, I meant a guy who wore clothes as we do. Although he was in his late 50s or maybe early 60s. But not older than that. I slowly pulled down my window by an inch or two. If this was a ghost, I did not want to be rude. I just wanted to exit this place alive. As I rolled down my window, he asked if I wanted to fill up with gas. And I got a little awkward. I mean, yes, I wanted to refill my tank. But not from here. I said I'm good for now and that I wanted to get home early, so I took off. He must have seen the look on my face. And I'm a terrible liar. He asked,
Did he mess around with you too? What did he do?
I was stunned. How did he know? And what do I tell him? I was at a loss for words. Before I could put some words together, he spoke.
Don't worry, mate. You're not the only one. He has spooked many outsiders like you.
I did not know how to react. Spooked because he is a friendly ghost? Or is he a YouTuber who pranks? I did not have the courage to ask him about it. I said that it was fine and that I got to get going. He asked me again if I wanted to refill my tank. I checked the indicator again and said it was fine. But this time, this man was gone. I looked in the passenger side mirror to see if he had ducked down. But he was not there. I turned back to see if I could see him anywhere on the rear side of the car. But no! He was gone. Vanished into thin air. Just like the previous guy. I was startled by the recent turn of events. I gunned for the exit as I kept looking in my rearview mirror. I don't know how or why, but it felt like I could see a silhouette of a lady near the gas station's door. It was a creepy town, and I decided to ignore it all and focus on the road. Luckily, in a few miles, I happened to see an exit and take it. It followed me to a country road into a small town with a 24-hour gas station that didn't scream horror. There was probably nothing wrong with that place, and I probably got creeped out by my own imagination. But I trust my gut, and when something doesn't feel right or is just too obviously creepy, I try to avoid it for my own safety. I worked at a gas station for almost a month, and then quit for good. I'll tell you about the crazy gas station encounter that eventually made me quit this job. One cold night at about 2 a.m., I had a woman come in. She was insanely skinny and had blonde thinning hair. She was wearing what looked like pajamas. There wasn't anything really out of the ordinary about her, so I only glanced up as I buzzed her in, called out a quick greeting, and went back to cleaning the store. After about 2 to 3 minutes though, I looked up to see that she was standing about 4 feet from the counter, just staring at me. And it was a completely blank, unwavering kind of stare. It startled me a little, and I asked her if I could help her with anything. But to my surprise, she didn't reply to my question at all. And instead, she just continued to stare at me. She eventually began looking around the store, but the entire time, she didn't take her eyes off me at all. She simply wouldn't break eye contact with me. It went to an extreme that she even walked backward at some points, simply so she wouldn't break eye contact with me. It was creepy to the core. And the only other staff at that hour was not working inside the store. He was outside, at the gas station. After she grabbed some things, she came back to the counter. She was staring, but also muttering something under her breath. It was really hard to understand whatever she was speaking, but I managed to make out a brand of cigarettes after getting her to repeat it several times. I got them for her, then scanned all her things and she paid. Her eyes were still locked on me and was showing no emotions at all. I mean, just try to imagine one person entering the same room as you and then just keeps staring at you endlessly. You never know what that person wants or what they would do to you. It was getting pretty unnerving at that point, and I was looking forward to getting her out of the door. As I'm handing over her the loose change, she suddenly smiled at me. Now that would have eased the tension a little, if only she would have not started to laugh. It was a really raspy laugh that reminded me of a witch's cackle. I tried not to react too much, and told her to have a good night, and took a few steps back from the counter. We were both kind of frozen. Her laughing and me having no idea what to do. She continued her cackling and stared for a few minutes. And then suddenly she left, walking backward again so she could continue looking at me. I felt really freaked out at that point, but figured she was probably just drunk or high, or just had some stuff going on. She was outside now and had wandered off somewhere. So I went back to cleaning and tried to move on from the incident. It was difficult, but somehow I managed it. An hour later, I was out in the store mopping the floor when I heard a loud thud against the window. The whole front of our store is just glass, and the noise came from right beside me. I looked up and that crazy woman was back. Her hand is pushed up against the window, and she was laughing again. I could just hear the cackle faintly, as I was quite close to the door. I must have really jumped at the sight of her, because she seemed to get a kick out of it, laughing even more and smacking her hand on the window repeatedly. I locked the door and ended up staying in the back room, where all of our security screens were, and waited for her to leave. It took around half an hour for her to leave me alone. The whole time, she was just banging on the window and laughing. I'm not sure what her deal was, and I doubt she posed any real threat, but it really freaked me out. I've seen her a few times since then. Sometimes she is just wandering past on the footpath outside, but she has never come in or hung around again. But if she ever does, I'm calling the cops right away. Now I didn't work at a gas station, but I worked a graveyard shift at a warehouse that was next to a gas station. I was in charge of the security of the warehouse. My job was a relaxed one. All I had to do was sit in a box all night, watch and monitor our 4 working cameras, listen to the radio, and log into a semi-trailer once every 2 to 3 hours. The town itself was fairly sketchy, and I was surrounded by bars and railroad tracks, so I frequently had to chase folks off the property. Once, a terminated employee of the warehouse was looking to gain entry to ask for his job back. Now I understand that this doesn't sound so weird until you realize that he arrived at 1 a.m., and that too on a holiday weekend. One morning, around 3 a.m., I had dozed off slightly, and the sound of screaming startled me awake. I could tell that it was from very close to me. As soon as I got alert and started frantically checking the cameras for the source of it, it stopped. Like completely gone. And I couldn't see anything in the cameras too. So I assumed that I had dreamed the entire thing, but something inside me kept telling me that something was off. I nervously turned on my radio and started reading a magazine. About 5 minutes later, I shrugged off the incident. And that's when I heard it again, and it sounded like it came from the alley between the buildings. I froze as I was suitably terrified. It didn't sound like a drunk person goofing off, or a domestic fight from one of the houses in the area that was literally known for this. It was a distinctly male voice, and he was screaming in ragged, gaspy, repeated bursts that would trail off into words that I couldn't make out. And at one point, I even heard the most hair-raising, psychotic laughter. What made it worse is that it was a dark and rainy night, and I couldn't see anything on the cameras. So being a petite 21-year-old female with a bit of a chihuahua complex, I grabbed my flashlight, phone, and pepper spray and searched the grounds for the source of the screaming. As I was returning, one of the regular night truck drivers pulled into the lot, and I got him to search the premises with me as well. We heard it again while we were in the warehouse, in the back part of the building near the train yard. It sounded like whoever or whatever it was heading up toward the tracks. The seasoned, tough trucker I was with said,
Jesus, that's creepy. Stay in the building tonight, and if you get in trouble for it, I'll talk to your boss in the morning.
There's probably not much more of an explanation apart from it being a drugged out or a mentally ill hobo, but I hope that person was fine and did not get himself or anyone else in any sort of trouble or harm. I still remember that my very first job was at a local gas station. I was 19 and worked there for about 2 years. And to this day, it will always remain the worst job I've ever taken up. I have quite a few stories, so I'll just list them as I remember them. For the record, I think it is important to tell you that I am a female. So I would frequently be the only one to take out the trash from the gas station. One night I was hauling my cart between pumps and picking up loose garbage, when a man looking to be around his late 20s or early 30s approached me and asked if I had a boyfriend. Immediately feeling uncomfortable, I laughed nervously and shook my head saying no. I regret doing that, but to be honest, I doubt that saying yes would have made him leave me alone. He then went on to ask if I was 16, all while walking behind me very closely. I told him no, dropped the handle of my cart, and went inside where I could be around people. I hid in the kitchen until he left. And when I got out, the coworker told me that the guy was telling everyone outside that he was my boyfriend. I clarified and got back to my work. When my shift was done, I left the gas station only to find him waiting for me outside it. This dude had waited hours for my shift to get over. I tried my best to not do any eye contact with him, but he had read my name tag and was calling me by my name. I looked up and asked him to get lost. Instead of getting agitated, this dude got some sort of satisfaction. He started walking close to me again, while I reached for the pepper spray in my bag. I pretended to have forgotten my keys at the gas station. So I turned back towards the gas station and ignored him until I got very close to it. And as I reached, I immediately pulled the pepper spray out and unloaded half of the can on him. He was on the floor struggling to sustain himself, but I kicked him down and kept spraying more. I called the cops and they took him away. I was never bothered again. Another day, a man who was obviously high made me watch him try on cowboy hats while asking if he looked good in them. He then went on to buy every single bottle of Coke that we had displayed on the shelf. The cashier had to help him carry it out in boxes. He was with a random old white guy who kept running his hand up and down his back. It was strange, but luckily they seemed pretty harmless. But the white guy seemed odd. As if he was not a human, maybe. You know, like maybe he was an alien pretending to be a human. Another incident was when a man whipped out his cell phone and recorded us without our consent. He was checking us out right from the beginning. He had read my name tag, and so he kept screaming across the store,
Hey, Stella!
and would not leave us alone. We had to call the cops. He then proceeded to try and get in a physical fight with one of our new cooks. It was a mess, to say the least, but luckily no one got hurt. Oh, and when I went to clean the bathrooms one night, I came across a regular customer who was pretty infamous for having sex with truckers outside in the parking lot and hanging around all hours of the day stealing things. She was really strange but harmless in general. She was wearing a cheap wig that wasn't on properly, and her face was bright red. She had been crying. I tried to avoid her because it was an overall uncomfortable situation, but she called me over and asked if she was pretty. I told her she was because she seemed like she could use some compliments. She smiled, cleaned up, and left. I didn't see her again after that, until she returned a few months later with a shaved head. Way back in the second half of 1990s, I worked overnight at an isolated gas station near my home. It was the first summer after I had graduated from high school. This gas station also had hot pizzas in a clear case, and this case opened from the back. You'd open the case, pull out a slice, put it on a plate, and hand it to the customer. One day when I came in at 11 p.m., there were 3 slices left in the case, which was 4 or 5 feet down the counter from the register. I ate one of those pieces for dinner, and then went about working on my shift, which consisted of standing at the register and simply waiting for people to wander in. It was a slow shift, and I had only 6 or 7 customers in a couple of hours. It was not a busy shift by any means, and most of them just wanted lottery tickets or to pay for gas. But by 1 a.m., there was no one in the store or at the pumps, so I started to clean the store. Not exactly clean per se, but I was adjusting items in a way it looked good and in order. It wasn't much of a task, and I was always in the eyesight of the front counter that had the register, the lotto machine, and the pizza case. Literally, no one came in for the hour I was neatening the store around and trying to make it look like I was working. After I was done with everything, I figured that the pizza must have been pretty much dried out by then. So I went to throw it out. I opened the case and there was just an empty tray inside. Somehow, the 2 slices of pizza had disappeared. Now, the only way to get into the pizza case was to get behind the counter. And to do that, you had to punch in a code, and then the door would buzz loudly before unlocking. In other words, you couldn't just reach around the counter and get to the pizza. I scratched my head, spent the rest of my shift nervously worrying that there was some random pizza-eating killer hiding in the store, and when a sheriff's deputy came in around 4 a.m., I asked him to check the building for any intruders. But he didn't find anyone anywhere. Before leaving at the end of my shift, I wrote a note to my boss detailing what happened, then went home. When I came in for my next shift, he was there waiting and told me he reviewed the video. So there were cameras aimed at the front counter, door, and over the store. And my boss played it back for me. It showed me ringing out a customer, then going and neatening up the shelves. Meanwhile, on the front counter camera, a couple of minutes after I left the counter area, the camera got shaky and then went static for a minute or so. When it came back on, the pizza was no longer in the case. I worked there for another year or so. But this never happened again while I worked there, and we never figured out as to what had exactly happened that night.